All right, we are live. Good evening, everyone. My name is LaSharday Scott, and I am the CEO and president of Scott Center for Observation, Treatment, and Transition. And our mission is to continue to build the community in face of health inequities impacting communities of color by bridging the educational awareness, policy, and outreach gaps between the community and healthcare professionals. We aim to eliminate preventable maternal health risks and newborn fatalities, assisting individuals and families transitioning from pediatric to adult care and sickle cell disease treatment while focusing on their mental health. This June, we are focusing on World Sickle Cell Day by highlighting the importance of addressing the need of minority blood donations and building our community within this population. So tonight's segment is very special to me because we have here Ray Blaylark. Our segment is focused on from caregiver to CEO. So y'all are in for a treat tonight. Uh, she is the founder and president of Sickle Cell Foundation of Minnesota, as well as a proud mother of a young adult son living with sickle cell disease. She founded the Sickle Cell Foundation of Minnesota to increase local and national awareness of sickle cell disease, elevate the voices of the community, and to improve health outcomes in this population. Over the past 20 plus years, Ms. Blaylark has served on several state and national health advisory committees and has represented the sickle cell community in various professional roles, including blood and marrow donor recruitment, pediatric care coordination, hemoglobinopathy counselor, program coordinator, community liaison. The list just goes on. She brings a unique perspective and her experience into this role as a community leader who has navigated the sickle cell space both outside of the healthcare system and as a caregiver on the inside of the system as a part of the pediatric clinical care team. It's through this dual lens that Ms. Blaylark continues to impact the trajectory of many individuals, families, and professionals of all whom have a critical role in improving the outcomes of this precious population. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be sitting here talking with you.
Yes. Audience, please feel free to type your questions or comments in the chat. We will respond. This conversation, as all the other conversations on our Let's Talk Sickle Cell series, have been more of a let's just get into it, be transparent. So we are open to answering any of those questions. So let's dive in, right? So prior to us going live, I stated to you I did not choose sickle cell, it chose me. So you tell the audience how sickle cell chose you.
You know what? Sickle cell, I think we all have a very similar story with that regard, particularly if you have, for me, I only have one child. So my first child ended up with sickle cell disease, but it chose me because no one ever educated me. It chose me because I wasn't able to make an informed decision because I didn't have all the information I needed. And I'm not saying that things would have been different. Maybe it would have been the same, but it surely would feel different had I gone into it knowing and understanding more than I did when my son was diagnosed. I learned that I had sickle cell trait in 11th grade. But I was going to our what we called our community clinic in our high school to get birth control. And it just so happened, I don't even know why they took the test or anything. And the person who told me that I had sickle cell trait didn't look like me. They just told me, and the way they explained it was that, a trait like your eye color or your hair color. Well, that's fine and dandy, but they didn't talk about, the makeup of your child's blood. So I never put two and two together. And so it was 7 years or so later when I had my first child, and he ended up having sickle cell disease. And it brought me back to that moment that I was told I had trait, but never explained how that should change the way I make decisions.
Yeah. That's interesting. I remember mentioning on a couple of the talks that trait is not taught the way that, or it's not, we're not receiving enough education on trait because we technically are not disease carriers, right?
Right,
But
right.
I always make the reference. I understand 1 + 1 = 2. So,
Hmm.
you know,
Always.
so it's kind of like, why aren't you guys taking this as serious? Because it is a serious, to me, I consider it sort of a public health issue.
It is. It
Um,
absolutely is.
and knowing, what trait and the things that are associated with trait, because now we know, right, that there's more associated with trait, sickle cell trait in athletes, having overexertion and dehydration, being mindful of that.
Yeah.
And then we also know, scuba diving or flying high altitude. So there's a lot more.
There's a lot that we should be aware of, and I'll be honest, I'm hoping that we are seeing a shift in the way that we educate and create awareness that is not just about sickle cell disease, but that we do spend more time talking about sickle cell trait, because I think that there is a large audience out there that just doesn't understand that 1 + 1 = 2. Not that they don't want to understand it, but it has not been brought to them in their language that they can best understand. And I'm not even talking about languages outside of English. I'm talking about in a way that we understand medical science and we understand. Listen, if the pandemic didn't teach us that everybody needs a science book, I don't know what will. But we recognize that in America, we may not have as much understanding of medical science as we think we do. And then we have to talk to people who have the expertise, and we are not speaking the same language.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I I get so frustrated because I feel like a lot of things could be preventable.
Hmm.
Um, but as we know, things that impact individuals of color, we don't receive the same amount of care.
We don't. But and part of that is because the less information we have, the less we're able to advocate for what we should have. Right? You
Yeah.
don't know what you need to know until after you should have known it. In many instances, I believe that when we have a better understanding of what our care should look like, what it should be, and we can speak the language of the medical system, that we will begin to see a change in some of our outcomes. Now, that's not everything, because we can change communication, but we cannot accept 100% of the responsibility for changing the hearts and minds of the people who care for us. There also has to be a shift in the way that um, medical professionals and practitioners show empathy towards their interactions with us. And they have to understand that our lived experience, um, can create capacity issues. We are all dealing with a number of things, just survival in Black and brown bodies. And so when you add education onto that, when you add health and healthcare onto that, I hate to even say it separately because it should always be seen as part of our healthcare, but mental health, when you add that on top of it, there is a great deal that we carry as a burden as being part of an underserved, marginalized community with disparities. Here in Minnesota is a perfect example. If you were to just pull our stats, we rank in the top 10 of US states for education, for raising a family and children and graduation. However, if you lift the layers back, if you scratch and sniff that thing, you gonna scratch it and it ain't gonna sniff too well, because the underneath the layers, when you dissect it based on race, that we are absolutely at the bottom, but it's covered up by all of the good results happening in other communities or dominant communities that can make it look like or keep people from looking at the details.
Yeah. Yeah. You just touched on so much to unpack just in that short comment that you made. Um, I am trying to, and I know you as well. I am working here diligently in the state of Ohio to raise more awareness in not just sickle cell. Let me be very clear. I'm
Yes.
talking about infant mortality, mental health.
Yes.
Eventually, I would like to step into prostate cancer and things of the things
Yes.
that really are,
Community health. I just call it community health.
yes, things that are taking us out by alarming numbers. I think that it's important, just and maybe you can attest to this too, Ray. But I tell people all the time, you have to interview your primary care providers. You
That's
have
right.
to, we have the right to do that. You have the right to fire them or hire them, whatever you choose to do, regardless of whatever insurance you're utilizing. You have that right to say, this person is not hearing me or listening to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to learn that. But having children, when you add a chronic diagnosis on top of that, it takes you to a whole nother level as one, being a parent and being an advocate. Because I kind of want to go back to like us saying sickle cell chose us, right?
Yes.
So prior to, what was your ideal job? Because I'm pretty sure you didn't see this in the future for yourself.
I got to tell you, so I was one of those teenagers that, nobody loves me and I hate it here and blah, 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 right? Not unusual for teenagers, but of course, all of those girly emotions that I didn't know what to do with. But my mother said something to me when I was about 14 or 15 years old, because I really struggled with depression in my adolescence. And she said, one day your misery will be your ministry. I
Yeah.
didn't understand what that meant. And in fact, I thought that was all about me. What I didn't understand is that my lived experience would somehow, some way really begin to make sense, and it would really reveal what my calling was. So I can't say that I was prepared, or that I knew, or that it was planned. But what I can say is that it was divine. Um, and I went to college, and I said all that to say this: I actually went to college for broadcast journalism, which is why I love doing interviews, and I have a show of my own. But when I decided that that wasn't going to work out for me, it was because I was having this cultural awakening, and I ended up going into Black family psychology.
Mm.
And it was out of um that care and concern for my community. I would look around and I would see the people who were hurting. I would see the people who were struggling, and I would see the people who were dysfunctional. And I would say, what's going on? Why? Just why? I had no understanding of the why. And so that's really what brought me down that road. Now, when I was in college, I actually worked in a plasma center. So if you know anything about plasma centers, they are not getting the wealthy of our society. They are getting those who also are marginalized and on the fringes, right? But that's the first thing that introduced me, to any kind of medical anything. And then after that, I had my son. I had my son before I graduated, and that took me down a different road. It really caught my attention because I didn't feel prepared. I knew that I didn't want him to feel ashamed of this diagnosis, but I first had to deal with making sure that I wasn't ashamed, making sure that I understood, how can I help him to be empowered through this if I don't feel empowered? But I don't feel empowered because I don't know, I don't have the information. I don't have the education. I don't know what I need to know. So I really set out to better understand sickle cell disease. Now, y'all, the internet was still had a green background when that happened. Y'all, some of y'all don't know nothing about that green background on the internet. So I couldn't go to my community. There was nobody talking about it in my community. All I could do is go to the people who held the power, right? That didn't feel the most comfortable to me either, but that was all that I had. And really just out of that, I asked so many questions, y'all, that, I I don't know if I gained more friends or lost more friends along the way, because I'm going to keep asking until I understand. I was that way in second grade. If my hand went up, the whole class was like, oh, yep, that's me. I got another question. And so that's how I just set out on this journey to learn. And I, because that's always been my nature, when this came, you know, when my son's diagnosis happened, I had to be intentional about creating a journey of learning, and that journey has become a lifelong journey. I'm still learning. I'm a lifelong learner about a lot of things, and particularly where it has to do with sickle cell disease and my community's health.
Yes. So I can definitely thank you for sharing that, for one. Two, I think people look at you now, right?
Hmm.
And they see, oh, Ray is doing successful, or she looks successful. She has all this going on for herself. She's at conferences, she's this, she's that, right? But you just spoke on a lot of things. So like even for myself, hey, Dr. Ebony,
Hi, Dr. Ebony.
even for myself, um, I I dropped out of school in 2008. I was originally going for secondary education. I wanted to teach middle school, high schoolers, things like that. Um, but that was not in the cards because of my kids. I ended up. So let me go back. I dropped out in 2008. I was working for Quicken Loans at the time. So when you go to school, you go for money. That's pretty much what you're going for.
That's right.
Set. So at that time, I thought that was going to be the path that I took. Fast forward, I got laid off. This, during this time, now we in 2015, I have two kids. One just was diagnosed with sickle cell disease. Then 2016, I had another child diagnosed with sickle cell disease. So
Mm,
they're literally 16 months apart. Um, and in that moment, I knew I had to make a change. I knew advocacy was going to be the thing. First of all, I ran away from social work because my mother is a social worker. So I did
mhm,
not want to do social work because
mhm,
one, she works with criminals. So in my head,
mhm.
that's all I saw was the stress, right? So I was like, no, I'm not gonna do social work. Nope, that's not for me. Only to end up doing social work. So I
Yes,
believe in when it's your purpose and you have that calling, as you said, it was divine. I believe mine was divine as well. Um, and one thing about me, when I start something, I'm going to finish it. I'm
that's
going to
right.
make sure that it's the best in every aspect because my name is attached to it. I feel
Yes,
like I brand myself, right? So I want to make sure that people understand if LaSharday is a part of it, it's gonna be successful
that's
because
exactly. And it's that spirit of excellence that we carry. But some of what led me down, I mean, there's always the things behind the scenes that are pushing and nudging you, even though you saw your mother's work, and you may not have wanted to specifically go into what she was doing, that it still had an impact on you. Both my parents are preachers, but my mother, who didn't tell me this until after she saw the path I was going down, my mother was deeply involved in the Black Panther movement. My father came from a long line of preachers. So I tell people I'm Martin and Malcolm at the same time. It just depends on the day and the person. There are always these things behind the scenes that are nudging you. And I'm going to say it a little bit different. We have what we need on the inside of us. Sometimes we don't tap into it until we need it the most.
yes,
And it's that I discovered was what was propelling me. It wasn't that I there was no getting prepared, right? It's your first child. Your first child has this diagnosis. There was almost no way for me to be prepared. What prepared me, what was already inside of me, and I had to do a deep dive to better understand who I was in light of this challenge that I did not expect to face. And it's through that, and I'm still digging deep to learn who I am, to find out what's in me that allows me, that will strengthen me, and empower me to get through yet another hurdle.
yeah, yeah. I always say if your kids, it's one thing for you to have motivation for yourself, right? But I always make the reference, if your children do not motivate you, then that's
Yeah.
something different. Because
Yeah.
I could not imagine. I know there is no one in this world that's going to advocate for my children the way that I advocate for them.
That's right.
As you know, so everything that I've created or implemented is for them. I mean,
Yeah.
other people benefit from it, of course, but the thought process comes from the things that I know that are going to impact them or affect them in the long run. So when we talk about, me creating a transition program and things like that, it doesn't exist here in Ohio. Now it does, but it
Yes.
didn't exist. So, so I'm always thinking of ways to help the community as a whole, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it wasn't inspired by my
Yes.
children.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I think that, life is very interesting. And I think that most people who are very reflective about life will tell you that, life doesn't reveal itself all at once. Life reveals itself in seasons. And what you learn to recognize is that a season that particularly the toughest of tough seasons are there to also prepare you for another season that you'll have down the road and in your future. And so when I began, I'm like I said, I'm a really introspective person. And so when I really began to look back, because I've had some crazy hurdles, y'all, I realized that anything that I'm going through now, I need to champion my way through so that whatever I'm going through, I pass this test. Number one, I don't want to repeat this test. Number two, I want to make sure that I collect all my tools and points. So down the road in the next season that I don't see coming, but that I already know that I've collected the tools from a previous season. Right. And that makes all the difference when it's time to face new challenges. My son came along at a time. I tell people all the time, I don't save while I do know that I impact my son's life and saving his life, my son saved my life. My son came along at a time in my life that I was overwhelmed. And I was not sure the path I was going to take. I was just challenged by a number of things, um, and he came along and he became my reason to not give up. And that was early years. I didn't even understand all the challenges we were going to face with sickle cell, but the fact that I was responsible for another life, the fact that I knew that, if I could be half the parent that my mother particularly was. I had my father as well, because he taught me some things from a man's perspective, but my mother particularly was just such an amazing woman of wisdom. I realized that I now have a purpose that goes beyond just me. And that purpose is absolutely what drives me. That drives me. I can't let my son down, no different than I can let my community down. But even when I want to give up, I look around and it's like, you ever seen that meme where you see the big lion and then the baby cub that's next to him, and you say you can't give up because others are watching? That's a motivation for me as well.
Yeah, yeah. That Dr. Ebony said she felt that her daughter's definitely her why. I say you can't go through life without knowing your why. To
You
be
shouldn't go through life without knowing your why. You
well,
should not. There's a lot of people who I think are still on that journey,
yeah,
and may not always know where to look for that why. Because you have to reshape how you think about life's challenges.
yeah, yeah,
And that's not easy. I don't it comes out easy, but to do it is a whole different beast. In theory and in practice are two different things. But it's funny because we do it. We connect with our village, we connect with others in our tribe who are like us. Lashade, we connected over being in the same village. And then we began to realize that we had all of these other things in common. And we began to link arms to say, okay, I don't believe in making strides alone. I'm always looking for somebody to bring with me,
yep,
right? Number one, burnout is real. So you got to find those safe spaces and safe people that you can just be yourself with. But also because, we have a responsibility to one another. And I want to see my brothers and sisters win. Like
Yep.
I'm rooting for everybody Black, right? I root for humanity, but I'm really rooting for everybody Black,
Yep.
because we need that sense of encouragement in our community. We need that energy in our community, and we need to be able to show those who may not understand their why, what finding your why looks like.
Yeah. I always say, because we talk about community. So I believe in asking, if it's somebody that I look up to, could you be a mentor? Or I have, like, even recently within the last 2 years, I've taken on mentees, right? Because
Yeah,
the thing is, I'm not gonna be here forever to do these things, right? And then I believe in bringing people up with me. So it's I'm really big on positivity,
yeah,
um and making sure that I'm not missing the mark, because
yeah,
it could be someone that's doing the same thing as me, but they have their own path. I
right,
think that there's enough space and enough room for people to do the same things, but have their own twist to it, right? And it shouldn't come off as competition. It shouldn't be any of that. So I really believe in, like, empowering those that are doing some great work, whether we are in the same spaces or not. I think that's where collaboration is, like, key.
yeah.
So
It
I
is key.
always put that in the forefront.
I think that we as a Black people have made it because we work together. There is no possible way that we would have made it through the hardships, generation after generation after generation, if we did not work together. And in fact, some of the challenges that we see in our community today, while are a result of the breakdown, an intentional effort to break down that unity in our community. There, during the civil rights movement, was a clear picture of what it looked like for us to work together, but it also gave those who were an enemy of our community an opportunity to study what makes us thrive, and to be very intentional about dismantling that. And so, one of the in working in community health, one of the healthiest things that we can have, even before a healthy body, is a healthy mind.
Yep.
And when we have a healthy mind, we are able to see the things around us through a healthier lens, and a more constructive lens, so that we can work better together, so that we can understand what we need to maintain our wellness. When you have a healthy mind, you will have a healthier body.
Yeah. 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 I agree with that. Dr. Ebony said, finding your village is so important. People that understand your walk, most times those closest to us don't understand the highs and lows of our journey. I definitely agree with that.
And you know what? It is true. And this is going to be I shouldn't, it's your show, not even mine. Usually I say controversial things on my show.
No, you listen, please be transparent. I do not bite my tongue on here.
I have every year I try to have a saying. There was a few years back that I said, everybody, we are all one community, but we are not the same village. The reality is that, the village is made up of people who are like-minded, on similar paths. You don't have to be absolutely alike. We're not talking about cookie cutter people, but we are talking about people who lift one another up, and strive for the same thing. And not even, I don't strive to have letters after my name, and have zeros after the numbers in my bank account. However, I'm not against those things either. But it's important for me to connect with people who are not who are not content with just accepting what they've been given.
Yes.
I appreciate what I've been given, but I'm going to get what's mine.
Okay. I always say when you do things from the heart, the money comes.
Yes.
I believe that.
Yes.
It's gonna come because you're doing it. One, you're doing it with a given heart. That's one. But two, when you're walking in your purpose, or you're doing the things that God set out for you to do.
Right.
It's already written. Your story's already written. You just kind of facilitating it and living out the purpose, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's why I say I think people don't necessarily see the struggles that you've had to get to this point. Because, like I said, people probably look at me like, "Oh, she's so well put together." They don't understand the struggles.
Oh, they don't understand.
They don't.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I was unable to work for 2 years because my son was constantly in and out of the hospital. That is what pushed me to go back to school.
Yes.
Because he said, if I'm going to be in this hospital every month, I need to be doing something that's going to generate some money eventually.
Right. No, really. That's right.
Because I didn't know the outcomes, and we weren't even talking about sickle cell crisis. We were just talking about fevers. He had, the fevers.
Yeah, and you don't get a choice. You staying in that hospital till they get those results back. It is you're absolutely right, because I think that you deal the cards you've been dealt, right? And your job is to look and see how many books you have and make some extra books with what you got, right? And for those who know spades, they understand what I'm talking about. You got to make some books out of that deck. The one of the things that really stood out to me was I can't educate what I'm uneducated about, right? And even though I had, what my college studies, it was really being able to translate that into life circumstances, right? And it may not have looked the way I had originally planned, but when I look back, listen, I started out in broadcast journalism. I do so much on camera and speaking. I went into Black family psychology for that degree. And so much of what I do when I was in the clinical setting, even in the foundation, is really working with families around coping strategies, around navigating life, around writing, your own narrative, all of those pieces. I knew that I was never going to be a preacher like my family, but in many ways, my ministry is my platform. My ministry is exactly that. And so, I think that when you adjust your perspectives, and you choose to focus on positive. Now, I'm a realist. Anybody will tell you I'm a realist. I'm gonna call out what it is, but I'm always going to put some level of positivity, hope, and solution in place. I there's nothing that irks me more than to sit and talk about a problem for hours. Okay, now what? What are we gonna do about that? We used to do this thing called what did we call them? Walk-in chats during the summer. And what it was we would get together and we would, for 10 minutes, we would talk about whatever the problem was. And then for 50 minutes, the rest of the walk, we're going to talk about community-centered solutions. We're not going to revisit the problem. We're going to stay focused on what the solution is. And I think that that's, some of that is a coping strategy, right? There's an element of that that's very important, because you have to train your brain or your brain will train you. My son is 27 years old now. He is incredibly impulsive. He's been impulsive, I do believe, since he came out of the womb. And many would call that ADHD. That might actually be what it is, but it's also this way of understanding, how do I retrain his brain? Because I don't need medication to be the only thing that he has on his recipe card, right? And so helping him to understand, you got to talk back to your brain sometimes, because unfortunately, because of the challenges that exist around us, that's the messaging that's consistently being given to us, is this negativity. Look at what happened. Look what ain't going to happen. Look how it's going to turn out. And unless you are very intentional about giving yourself new messages, new tapes, you'll get sucked in to that negativity. So while being part of what's happening in the negative of our community, I really work diligently to not be part of the negativity, right? And to look for ways to bring solutions, and not just problems.
Yeah. So I kind of want to turn the table here a little bit.
Okay.
How did you or did you have your son involved in a lot of these things? Because I know, and I'm just thinking of my own experience right now, so that's why I'm asking you this question
Yes.
personally. How involved did you have your son in the things that you're doing?
So when he was a child, I had him involved as much as possible. But I'll tell you something, because I've oftentimes really had to reflect on that, to say, did I do too much? Was I doing the right thing? So let me start with, I know that everything I did with good intentions, right? What I will say is that, so if there was, keep in mind, I went into blood banking, right, through and worked with their sickle cell program, and so that was my platform for almost 10 years, and so I was able to bring my son in regularly, to do his story, to do photo shoots, and to be on the side of the bus and on the billboard. And I started noticing, as he got into adolescence, he was a little bit more resistant to it.
Mm.
And I didn't always recognize the position I was putting him in.
Mm.
And while it was for a good cause, it also has to be done, with an awareness of who your child is, how that child is coping, what their challenges have been, and how they're processing their challenges. Do they understand advocacy? Do they understand the why behind why you're involving them? I remember the first time my son, he was an adult, he was over 18, so he could tell me no, because you under 18, I don't know what that word means. So I am a Black mama. But the first time he told me no, and I was like, what you mean no? and he said, that's your thing, Mom. That's not my thing. And I was crushed, but he was right. He was right. He was like, I don't want to sit up and talk about sickle cell disease every day. I got it. Everybody ain't going to just sit and talk about it just because they have it. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Now he's 27 now. That was when he was about 18. The moment he could say no, he regularly exercised his rights. And you heard me talking to him just a second ago. So, we have a great relationship, and we're very open and honest and direct with one another. But it's because I came to terms with, okay, who he is. He has elements of me, but he's not who I am in that regard, and that's okay. So what I would recommend to any parent, particularly with younger children who want to get their child involved, is, in age appropriate ways, make sure that your child understands the why of your request. What makes it meaningful to them and not just meaningful to you? Because there's very few things that go over our kids' heads these days. They are capable of answering that question. And don't get me wrong, sometimes they'll be like, I don't know. Sometimes they just need guidance in finding the words. I see Dr. Ebony said she had to realize that listening to that is really important for their mental health. Whether adult or child, it can be a bit much. Absolutely. What we do in the advocacy space is not for the faint of heart. It's an added burden, in fact. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's a weight that we carry of responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And if If we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not checking in with our why, we will lose ourselves in this work as well. We will lose our identity outside of the sickle cell space. But all the more for children who are just beginning to understand who they are and finding their identities. I don't ever want a sickle cell warrior to see themselves only as a warrior. But
Right.
if you're not careful, you can create that by overemphasizing their sickle cell. One of the things that I did with my son is, we talked openly and honestly about sickle cell disease, but I also didn't keep him from anything. I would tell him, you may not be able to do everything that your friends do like they do it, but there's nothing you can't do. You just do it a little different. And
Yep.
so it wasn't an option, to not. He went swimming and he would have crisis after crisis, but he wanted to go swimming. Well, let me call the doctor and let him know we probably gonna be in later because Trey wants to go swimming. But what I realized is that his quality of life was based on his ability to participate in life. Though I had to teach him how to participate, smart participation,
Yeah.
um, and the things that we could do, is particularly when he was younger, right? The things he could do to kind of get ahead of potential complications. I could not fathom telling him what he can't do because of sickle cell. That we were going to be in it and we were going to deal with whatever the repercussions are. We were going to learn together, or we were going to better understand how do we make this work for someone who has sickle cell versus, well, I guess that's on the list of the things you can't do. And I that didn't work for me. He was on Little League. He would go out to the Little League, and I knew it was hot outside. I would give him tons of water. I could see the drain in his face, and I would stand up and be looking at him, and he'd be like, "No, no," because he knew I was about to be like, "Time out," and I would see him turn around. I would see him. I would see him vomiting because he was so hot and drained and tired, but he wanted to be there.
Yeah.
I struggled with that for a whole season. And as he began to get his words, he would be like, "Mom, I just want to do the things that seem fun to me." I couldn't take that from him because I knew being in the hospital wasn't fun. And quite frankly, for his mental health, for who
Yeah.
he was, he needed to be able to do some things that were fun for him, because dealing with his sickle cell, like your son, he was in and out of the hospital constantly. Constantly. I don't think there was a holiday we were home for the first probably 7 years of his life.
Yeah.
It would just trigger him every time. So it's a matter of really understanding your child, what they want to do, and then learning together how to be able to do that as a warrior.
Yeah. Yeah. That was some good feedback. Uh I'm filtering through myself, but I'm so it's funny because my husband always refers to me as a tiger mom. But I really think that just the empowerment piece, definitely letting them do things. So we do let them play sports. We try to
Yeah.
ask them things that they want to do. But in the meantime, they're gonna be involved some way, somehow
Right.
with changing that narrative, because we know a lot of patients do not speak out
Yes.
about what it is that they're going through, even if they have to do it in their own way.
Yes.
I want to encourage that.
Yes.
Um,
And them doing it in their own way, I think that's where we as parents are growing in our flexibility. It's very easy to see this straight and narrow path that we want to put them on. And this generation ain't having that.
mm-mm.
Period. They are not. They're gonna carve their own way and they're gonna do it their own way. And before I turn it back over to you, my mother said something to me when my son was young, and I was going to kill him. And it had nothing to do with sickle cell. It just had to do with he was growing and going through these stages. And I was like, I'm going to kill the boy. I just think I'm going to kill him. And she said two things. She said, the time of planting is never the time of harvest.
Mm.
I breathe that every day. The time of planting is never the time of harvest. But the other thing that she said is that our job is not to break their spirit, it's to shape their spirit. So the very things that probably rub you the worst are glimpses of strengths that they will have that will work to their benefit down the road. So our job is to shape it as it evolves and as they mature, and so that they understand how to apply that strength that is coming across as a weakness right now, because I don't want to have to choke you.
Yeah. Yes, because the thing that I'm struggling with right now, and they're usually pretty good, but now they're getting at this point where they take the medicine when they want to.
Oh, yes.
And my response is, and this may be harsh, but it's the truth. Do you want to live or die?
Now
Because
we're talking about something different, right? They're under your roof. This is what they need to do. It's like sitting down to dinner, finishing your plate, right? That is something that, again, the why, right?
yeah,
You don't want to die. Don't get me wrong. I have used that.
yeah,
My son didn't have no problem taking meds. He was, he was probably 5 years old when he started taking pills. He was not here for the liquid. Give him the pills, and I had to force him to take them with water. Sir, those are going to get stuck.
yeah.
I swallowed my saliva. I need you to drink more. So he didn't have a pill aversion. But psychologically, down the road, as he got into adolescence or closer to adolescence, I saw this aversion to taking his meds. And I started asking other friends and colleagues and other warrior moms. And sometimes just putting that medicine in their mouth is a reminder that they have sickle cell disease.
Mm.
There are underpinning psychological impacts to having to take something every day. So you know what I did? I went and got multivitamins so that we take our medicines at the same time together.
We do that. I'm gonna tell you what I think it is. I think they get into these video games because they're 7 and 8. So I'm not sure if it's that as of yet, the pill reminder, but I know they're literally day and night. Like one doesn't mind taking the pills, the other one does. They're just so different.
Yeah. It's finding what motivates them. And one of the things that I really dislike about the way that our society has moved, we have taught reward for doing normal everyday thing. It bothers me greatly. But it's a little too late to turn back, right? We are in an immediate gratification society. It's about what do I get for doing the right thing? Sadly, it's crazy. But you have to tap into what their motivation is. Now, it doesn't always mean that there's going to be some, monetary reward or, but allow it to accrue over time. So if, in a 30-day period or in a quarter period, you have more successes, than you had the last quarter. Yeah, we're going to celebrate that. I'm not rewarding you. I'm celebrating you. Yeah. Let me change some words, because life is not going to always reward you in that way. But I wanted him to feel celebrated, like he did something right, and to keep it from being all responsibility, while at the same time teaching responsibility. Right? That's part of the challenge. Is how do I address this area of weakness in you so that we can turn it into a strength, and yet not overburden you and create this anxiety now, that lives on you to what you have to do and need to do. We don't want it to be that. We want it to be a normal part of your daily routine. It take 30 seconds, do it, get it done, you done. Move on with your life for the day. Right? But taking meds is not my son's favorite thing. And I'll look at him and I'll say, so you haven't been taking your meds, huh? And he'll be like, what you mean? I've known you longer than you've known yourself.
Yeah.
So, everybody's different. Every child is different. What motivates them is different.
Yeah.
Some, it's the distraction of games and things. For some, I would say that it's a little bit deeper. Games are a distraction. But I would say that there was probably the fruit of not wanting to really take it already kind of living there.
Yeah. Yep. I can see that for sure. Um, so we named this segment caregiver to CEO.
Yes.
I know technically you always gonna be a caregiver. That's just the reality of it. But moving forward to the CEO status, like what is your day to day? Like what is I know it's every
Ooh.
day different, but what is a typical day for Ray?
Well, first and foremost, I moved into the CBO. Let's talk about how I became of the founder of Sickle Cell Foundation of Minnesota. When I came into this space, obviously I had my son, and then about 6 or 7 years later, actually the year that the sickle cell stamp was released, was the first time I had been in a larger setting that was specifically for sickle cell. The post office was doing an unveiling or celebration or something. And I met a gentleman who was older than the age of expectancy that they gave me for my child.
Mm.
Now, I'm a woman of faith, and that has been instilled in me since birth. And yet I never came to terms with the fact that even though I was doing everything to ensure he was living, in the back of my mind, I was still waiting for him to die.
Mm.
Not expecting it, not hoping for it, but knowing that was going to happen, and then being assigned a time frame, right? When I met him, there was this light bulb that went off in me, and it realigned my perspective. And I walked away from there looking for ways to get involved in the community. I did not just become a warrior mom, and after a series of clinic appointments, be like, I think I'm gonna take on the whole state. Not at all. But so I joined a local community-based organization that was present at the time, and I faithfully served as part of that community, and kind of moved up the ranks, ended up being on the board. And then there was a transition where they were dissolving the organization for a lot of different reasons. And I said, well, what are we going to do now as a community? We can't be without representation. And I really just had to sit back, and it was really because, if I were to be totally honest, other people telling me, Ray, you can do this, because I was like, no, 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 nope, not for me. Nope, I don't want to do this. I don't think this is the right thing for me to do. I began to say, why not me?
Yeah.
Why not me? I knew the passion that I had. I knew the relationships that I had already began building. I being in blood banking gave me a bit of a soapbox, and I was able to really gain some valuable insight from other professionals throughout the medical field. And that was what finally made me say, okay, I'm going to do this. So fast forward a little bit. 6 months after I started Sickle Cell Foundation of Minnesota, I was headhunted by our local pediatric clinic to come and be a part of their sickle cell program. Now, that was not what I expected. I'm like, okay, Lord, I just obeyed you because you told me to start this organization, and now this other opportunity. So that must mean I'm not supposed to take it. And someone whom I really respect said, whoa, pause. I want you to make sure you look at this through a bigger lens, and not just through what you think your path is towards the foundation. I ended up accepting that role. I stayed for almost 7 years. So for 7 years, I was managing 350 patients by day, and then the rest of the state at night and on the weekends. That was a lot. That was a lot. Um, but I loved what I did. When the pandemic hit, um, I saw the needs of my community begin to increase.
Mhm.
Remember, Minnesota is also the epicenter of George Floyd. So when that happened, that was a block and a half from where I lived, where I grew up. And I began to say, okay, I knew that I couldn't be in the clinic forever, but it was another pivotal transition point to where I said I need to take a look at where I'm supposed to be in this season. And I stayed for I worked through the pandemic for about a year and a half because I really wanted to make sure that that our patients were well cared for during that time and that they had representation, um, even when they were not in the clinic. And so it was when I felt like I had the release to leave is when I left. So that I could build out the infrastructure, right? We have a tendency as Black folks, we'll start a business or we will start an organization, and the first thing we do, we roll up our sleeves and start doing the work, right? So we don't always have the infrastructure that we need to ensure that we have a solid foundation, because rocky times come, especially if it's a nonprofit, right? So what I knew that I needed to shore up some of our infrastructure and make sure we had things in place. And that's why I decided to leave. So now what does my day look like? My day is I meet with, well, you read some of the the advisory committees, work groups, boards that I'm on, but it's also taking calls and meeting with families. I meet with families who are having financial difficulties, talking through resources and accessing resources. But it's also, how can we reshape your financial future to work better for you? I get calls about, being removed from the hospital in the middle of the night by the police. I get those calls, and Ray gonna put her clothes on and she's gonna head right on down there, right? I get calls about, egregious behaviors in the workplace, that disregard the Americans with Disabilities Act, and making sure that they have their employee rights, education rights in place. 504Bs and all of the things that are in place that not all of us know about, to ensure that our rights are not being ignored or disregarded. Um, I have partnerships with pharmaceutical companies that allow me to have conversations that help to give them insight into the needs of our community, and into building out programs so that if they have a product, they should also have something in place that addresses the disparities, and the access issues. So I do that. I do speaking on DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, looking at data and the multiple ways to look at data and extract the information that is most meaningful, and that does right by our community. So Lord knows, every day is full of something that is either very, very specifically tied to sickle cell, or is tied to community health, in some way, shape, or form. But it really is about making sure that I not just have a seat at the table. So a lot of people fight to have a seat at the table. I argue for, I want to go to the grocery store with you and help decide the menu, because I spent years being invited to the table, and the minute I give my 2 cents, I get the side eye because Ray just took us off course. I sure did, because you never asked before you got this far down. You came to the table already deciding what you wanted, and from my perspective, the path you're on isn't going to lead you to the outcome you need. So I've learned to say, I need to be included well before we go to the table of stakeholders, so that we are truly bringing to the table what matters most, and that we're operating in a way that gives us flexibility. We might discover the path that we're on is not the path, and we need to be able to take a sharp left instead of going straight. I need to be at those tables, because if you've already decided what you want it to be, you don't need me. I'm just a token there. Now, don't get me wrong. I've been at token tables and turned that table upside down, respectfully, y'all, respectfully, but to shift the whole understanding of what's happening at that table. And so I look at every opportunity through the lens of what can I bring to that space. And if I can bring that space, if I can bring myself in my authenticity to that space and make a difference, I want to be able to do that.
Yeah. Dr. Ebony said, Ray, your multiple roles remind me of the complexity of sickle cell disease. You are so needed in so many different areas when you work in a sickle cell disease community. Thank you for your dedication. Yeah. Everything, I mean, you really touched on a lot of things. I remember being in a situation where some decisions were being made for sickle cell patients, and there were no parents. I mean,
right,
outside of myself, but see, I was in a different role. I wasn't there as a parent. I was there as, in a different role for sickle cell. And I posed the question, how are we making decisions and there's no one at this table living with sickle cell? First of all of you are white.
That's right. That's right. Do you
And
even know anybody with sickle cell?
And then I got the side out like, did she just say that? Yes. None of you know what it feels like.
That's right.
I only have a small piece, which is I'm a mother of 2 warriors, right? But I do not live in their body. One, they're still, I mean, they're able to tell me now, like the type of things that they're dealing with a little bit. But even more so, it's like I'm still learning. They're still learning what it is that they have, so we need to get some people that are informed and that actually deal with this on a regular. So when you say they already came to the table with their ideas, I'm like, no, this is not what that is. This is this cannot be done.
Yeah. Hi, Wumi. It's very true. I also think, and this ties back into, you asking about how do we involve our children, right? We sometimes just being in the room to see what advocacy looks like. Sometimes we have to show them what it looks like to be in those spaces. If nothing else, my son was in a number of prestigious environments before he knew he was in a prestigious environment. He knew how to show up in those spaces, how to dress, how to speak, how to have conversation, and of course, what not to say. Because we always gonna have that conversation with the kids. Now, here's what you're not gonna talk about. But so we also have to be that living example. And I do believe that when we are in those spaces and we ask those questions, that we are challenging their idea of what it means to be advocating for us versus advocating with us.
Right.
Okay. I remember being in when I was in the clinical space, and I remember being in a meeting, and we were working on building out a new program, and there were some community needs, and I had someone in that space say, "Well, I don't think Ray should do that because she might not have the credentials." Well, that was not the first time little snide comments had been made, and that there had always been little microaggressions, which I don't respond to everything. Every battle isn't a war, but that day I was there for it. That day, I was there that day, and I said, "We're gonna stop this meeting right now. We have to stop." And basically what I told them in so many words is, I don't have the letters that all of you have, on your name. I said, but what I do have is something that none of you have. And that's a street degree that I gained by lived experience.
Well,
So I don't have your degree. And guess what? You don't have my degree. And you need my degree to make this work. So let's get back to work. And and I would simply say that we have to be in those spaces to help them to understand our value in those spaces. Now, that doesn't mean there's not strategy. Like I said, I had let some things pile up and I had processed how best to deal with them and had, approach them in various ways. But that day we wasn't going to let that fly no more, no longer at all.
no, I get it. It's funny because I think people really have it messed up. Even when we talk about patients, they know their body better than
That's right.
anybody.
Even their parent, right?
They're the expert.
They begin to know their body better. Yes.
Yes. So for you to sit there and say, oh, she said experience is the best degree and sometimes makes you more of an expert than those with one. Absolutely. But unfortunately, we know when we're in certain spaces or we're dealing with certain people, that is what they go for.
Right.
Right. And I remember saying this to my husband. I remember telling him, I said, working in this field, I hate to say it, sometimes the credentials do matter.
And that's very true.
And it's not that, because you made a comment earlier, and I'm right there with you. I'm not a person that has to have all these accolades or anything, but the schooling that I've been doing is not even necessarily, it is for me to a certain extent, but it's not.
Yes.
It's the mission that I'm trying to push out. So, I know people like, dang, she back in school. I even thought about going to school to be a DO. This is how deep I'm invested.
Yes.
But I had to come back down a little bit because I've been in school for so long. My kids, they need their mom, right? So I'm like, I'm not gonna put that off the table all the way, but I just know right now that's not
absolutely. And I've done a lot more after my son got old enough to where I could change my focus a little bit and look at my career. When I had my son, I put everything about my education career on the back burner. And to be quite honest, it's by the grace of God that I was able to break into the medical field without so many of the degrees that get most people there. Now, since then, I've gone back. I have certifications and things, and I'm actually planning to return to school to get my master's. But it for that very reason, because there's certain spaces that you do get into. But I also I don't want people to think that it can't happen. I want you to be the best version of yourself and get as much that you can, because the more you come with, the more you listen. What I would say is that the path I took to gain that respect, I gained that respect over years because I didn't have that degree. Whereas having that degree, you come in with a level of respect. Right. That's a bit of the difference. I also learned to align myself with the people who could open the door for me without going in first.
Okay.
Did I say that right?
You said it right.
I strategically aligned myself with people who understood what their privilege was and understood how to use their privilege to assist communities who didn't have that privilege. And if I can say anything, I would say that make sure that you are a diverse individual. You don't have to sell out. You don't have to be you don't have to sacrifice your authenticity to be a diverse person. It is critically important that I understand the way that a customer thinks, a client thinks, my children think. I need to better understand that because it enhances the way we can communicate with each other, and we'll get that much further. Right. And by doing that, I was able to, establish those relationships. But I will absolutely say, if it is within your power, if and so many things are within our power, even when we don't think so, to go back to school, to gain some knowledge, even if you have to do it at a different pace than someone else. Begin the process, because it's a journey of a million steps, and every step matters, but you got to start with that first step.
Yes. And also, just to piggyback, we also want to make sure that you're not looking at other people's journey and thinking that's the way that you're supposed to.
Yes.
Do it in your own way. I definitely walk on my own beat, and I'm walking in my own lane, So
Yes.
it makes others uncomfortable, then that's on them. That's not
That's
on
the way I run my organization. So there's a lot of large organizations who are doing amazing things. And there are organizations who are small and doing amazing things. There are organizations that have, a lot of staff. And I don't think any of us have a lot of staff. Let me just put that out there. There are organizations that have some staff that can help them fulfill that mission, and there's others that don't. I had to learn very early on, because I'm a visionary. And so I'm the type of person that I like to be in a visionary role so that I can grow up, but I need to be surrounded by people who can help me grow out, right?
Yep.
And that takes money. But what I learned is that until I get to that place, I can't compare myself as apples to apples against another organization or another leader that may have access to resources that I don't yet have. What I can do is look at that as a blueprint, right? And a blueprint is really is not telling you everything you need to know, but it's giving you some guidance. And that's what I learned to use, rather than doing a comparison, because otherwise seeds of jealousy and competition will, I've turned down grants because there were people in my region whom I respect greatly that had I got the grant, they wouldn't. And I felt like, how can I partner with them so that we both can benefit? I can't take from the mouth of my brothers and sisters in order to feed me. I'm just not cut like that. Now, I understand business is crude. I understand all of these other dynamics, but my compass drives me to partner, not compete.
Yep.
That's what I look for the opportunities to do.
Yeah. I just appreciate you coming on here tonight. You and I, we can talk all day. We done went over 11 minutes. We can talk all day. But I appreciate you coming on. If you can leave just one word of wisdom for our audience, what would that word be?
I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, because I really do live by it. The time of planting is never the time of harvest. There's a lot of things that we put a lot of energy into, and we look up and we're like, well, nothing's happening. And I encourage us all to understand that trees don't grow into trees overnight, and they start with germination. You have to water them. You have to care for them, tend to them. So the time of planting is never the time of harvest.
I love that. Audience, thank you guys for tuning in tonight. You do not want to miss June 16th. I will have Yumi as well as Dimitri and Nance. They are going to talk about their experience, one being used to have sickle cell disease and caring for a child with sickle cell disease. So
Yes.
This is our special for World Sickle Cell Day. That will be same place, same time, 6 p.m.
I know both of them, and y'all don't want to miss that. It's gonna be good.
So we'll be here. We'll be sharing those stories or hearing those stories. So I'm looking forward to that. And like I said, thank you again, Ray, for coming on here and sharing your story. So we have to get back together and collaborate on something.
My absolute pleasure. And thank you for having me. What an honor.
No problem. Everybody have a good night.
Good night, all.